Well, good morning to all you prayer warriors out there, all of our friends that support Giving Others Eternity Ministries. I just thank you so much for your care and your concern, and most of all for your prayers. I'm coming to give you a quick update today about what's going on with our ministry and just share with you just a few things from our Mardi Gras outreach. I've got a few slides that I want to show here in just a moment to you and just talk about the Mardi Gras outreach briefly. But I do want to say thank you so much to those of you who support our ministry, who help us financially in order to be able to take the gospel to places like New Orleans and Columbia and even NC State and UNC Chapel Hill and the bus station in downtown Raleigh. We couldn't do it without you guys. So thank you so much for everything that you're doing to help us share the gospel with those who need Christ. So I want to go and tell you just a few things about the Mardi Gras outreach. I'm going to add some slides here for just a moment and talk about that. That was February 7th through the 14th. We flew out early morning out of Raleigh-Durham, myself and Pat McClanahan and Joe Toy, and we joined a team of men down in New Orleans. We came in just a little bit early in order to kind of get our bearings and even get out on the street a little bit earlier than the actual outreach start. The way the schedule works is Thursday evening, we come together at 7 o'clock. We have a time of worship. We have a time of prayer. We have a time of just kind of housekeeping, so to speak, where we talk about the things that are going to happen during the day on the outreach. And then Friday morning, we're up again early, 7:30 for prayer. And then from about 8 to almost 11, we have our main session where we have a time of worship. And we have a speaker who comes in and shares a message with us to encourage us in our evangelism efforts. And so it was a great one as usual. Our speaker was Dr. Preston Nix, who is an evangelism professor at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. We love Dr. Nix. He is truly an evangelist. Even though he's a professor, he takes his students out every week to share the gospel, not necessarily in the French Quarter, but in some of the neighborhoods that are around the area, including East New Orleans, which is one of the high crime areas there in New Orleans. And he is a great mentor. He was a great speaker, of course. We love Dr. Nix. So once we finish up with that, we gather our stuff up and we head to the French Quarter for our day of witness. And we'll go out in the afternoon. We'll hand out tracts. We'll talk to people one-to-one. Some of us will go to certain locations and preach. And so we go up to the corner of Bourbon Street and Canal, where we set up our speaker system and we preach, we hand out tracts, and we talk to people one-to-one. And so this year, as usual, we encountered some spiritual warfare. It was kind of intense at times. We had some folks that were opposed to the gospel. We had one man who came up there and started throwing stuff at the guy who was preaching. He was digging stuff out of the trash can and throwing it and just being general pain. But we tried to engage him. We tried to talk to him. And of course, he wasn't having anything with that. And so, in fact, he stole the hat of one of our team members and ran off and threw it in the middle of Bourbon Street and then took off and with the hat again. Anyway, it was an interesting experience. We expect that when we go down to New Orleans. So looking here at your screen, you'll see a couple of conversations that I had. One, you'll see a conversation I had with a man named Jody. He's the guy that's wearing the dark shirt and has a cigar in his hand. He come and stood in front of Mark Johnson, who was preaching at the time, and he listened intently. And so I went over to him and handed him a gospel tract and engaged him in conversation. Asked him if he was a believer, and he said yes. He told us he loved the preaching of the word. And so I asked him rather frankly, I said, well, let me ask you this. His name was Jody. I said, Jody, if I were to come up to you today and someone had stabbed me in the back with a knife, I had 2 minutes to live, tell me how to be saved. And he kind of thought for just a second, took another puff on his cigar, and he came back with a fairly good answer. of course, faith in Jesus Christ. And so we talked about that for a little bit. And then he started asking some questions that were a little bit off. He had some unusual beliefs about Adam and Eve, and they weren't literal people. And he asked questions about Cain and Cain's wife and those things, which are standard questions that a lot of unbelievers ask. But anyway, so I addressed each one of those issues. We talked about how sin had affected all of creation, which he didn't believe that. But then I showed him in the scripture where it talks about that in the book of Romans, chapter 8, where Paul talks about how sin had corrupted all of creation, and creation waited for the redemption that was also for the sons of men. So anyway, we had a great conversation there, and I asked him finally, I said, well, let me ask you, Jody. I said, if you were to die today, would you go to heaven? He says, well, I'm not sure. I'd probably not go because of the way I'm living my life. So pray for him. He had all the right answers, like some Christians do, but it didn't necessarily mean that he had a right relationship with God. Had some other conversations there. There's a picture down in the bottom left corner of me talking with a local man, and I never did get his name, but he is in a wheelchair. He'd been in an accident several years back, and he goes around the quarter preaching the gospel. He had a megaphone in his cart. He had a little fold-up sign, and so it was a delight to talk with him and share our mutual experiences with sharing the gospel. So it was great to see this guy. You can see some of the things that took place. Top left corner, you'll see Dennis Moore, our team leader, and he is talking to a young lady who actually gave her life to Christ out there on Bourbon Street. She's a local. So that was an exciting thing to see. Just pray for her that she'll get involved in a local church. By the way, our ministry is based out of Bucharest Baptist Church in the Quarter. They have been so good to us through the years to provide us a place of rest, a place to store our materials. And so pray for Bucharest and Pastor Alex as they minister to people there year round in the French Quarter. They do a lot of ministry to the homeless people. Then you see a couple more pictures preaching. You see Dennis preaching in the larger picture, myself preaching in the bottom one. So statistically, here's what happened. We had 25 team members who came. One person had to drop out right there to last. But 42,000 gospel tracts were distributed. It's amazing to see how many get out during those days of outreach. So we had 8 people who repented of their sins and put their faith and trust in Jesus Christ. And our team leader follows up on them. Okay, so we're not just leaving them out there, not just leading them in a sinner's prayer to lead them in a sinner's prayer. We have discernment when we do these things. We had one rededication, and then we had one of those people who trusted Christ to reach back out to us immediately to request discipleship materials. So that's exciting. Much for all that you're doing. Let me get out of the slide thing here. How am I going to do that? My goodness. Oh, there it is. I'm still learning this software, guys. So, but you guys really have helped us in so many ways by praying for us, and we felt your prayers down there. We had another incident with a man who didn't like the preaching of the word, and he was standing there near our location, and he was telling us to shut the blank up and all this kind of stuff. And finally, my friend Joe had to go and stand between him and the preacher because he was threatening to attack the preacher. And then I came over, and then Dennis came over. So we had a wall of folks who were just waiting to make sure that this guy didn't attack the preacher. We didn't try to attack him, but we just stood there in defense. And finally, I had to call 911 because this guy was just still belligerent, still after an hour trying to get to the preacher. So that just goes with the territory. You're involved in a spiritual war out there on the streets, and especially in New Orleans during Mardi Gras. So that's our Mardi Gras outreach. Looking forward to next year as we go back as well. So thanks for your prayers. Just telling you about a few things that are coming up. Of course, we're engaging in our local ministry. I was at NC State on Tuesday. I was at the bus station yesterday, and we're sharing the gospel. Next Thursday at UNC Chapel Hill, they actually have a big prayer rally that's been scheduled. So our plan is to go there about lunchtime and to preach on the campus during the day, then stop and get something to eat, and then go to the prayer rally. Some of the students there have encouraged us to come. We have students on that campus that have started preaching. And this was something that God did. It's nothing that we pressured them into, but they began that. And so there's a solid remnant there, and we need to pray for them. Coming up with the Columbia trip that is scheduled for April 18th through the 27th. Be in prayer for wisdom and discernment there. We had hoped that Penny was going to be able to go, but it's kind of up in the air right now about whether she will be able to. But we are going to do ministry in schools again, churches, and be in prayer for my translator, Pastor Justin, that I work with down there, because his wife just recently had a heart attack and she's only 31 years old. So pray that they'll be able to figure out what's going on there. In order to raise that support for that ministry, we've got to have $4,300, I believe it is. We've already purchased airline tickets in faith, believing that the resources are going to come in to replace that. But just be in prayer for that issue, and Lord will provide. We know he will. He doesn't lead us anywhere that he doesn't provide for. So thank you so much for all your prayers. And I just ask that you remember us on a daily basis. So God bless